The sound of galloping hooves against hard-packed earth echoed through the quiet morning as Mabel Thornton watched a lone rider crest the distant hill, his silhouette dark against the orange and pink sunrise. She paused, one hand hovering over the clothesline, a damp sheet fluttering in the breeze. Something about the figure, perhaps the straight-backed posture or the unhurried pace, told her this stranger would change everything. Montana Territory, 1876. Spring had finally arrived after a brutal winter that had nearly depleted their food stores and certainly depleted Mabel's patience. At 22, she had spent her entire life on this homestead, watching her parents build something from nothing, only to lose them both to influenza 3 winters past. Now it was just her and her younger brother Timothy, struggling to maintain the cattle ranch their father had established. Mabel quickly pinned the sheet to the line and hurried inside the modest cabin. "Timothy, rider coming," she called, smoothing her apron and tucking loose strands of chestnut hair back into her simple bun. Timothy, 16 and gangly with youth, peered through the window. "Probably just passing through," he muttered, but reached for the rifle that hung above the door nonetheless. "Put that away," Mabel scolded. "We don't want to seem unfriendly." "Unfriendly is safer these days," Timothy argued, but reluctantly returned the weapon to its place. Mabel understood his caution. The last year had seen an increase in cattle rustling throughout the territory, and 2 neighboring ranches had been robbed at gunpoint. Being a woman running a ranch made them vulnerable in the eyes of some, though Mabel had worked alongside her father since childhood and knew every aspect of ranching as well as any man. The rider approached at an unhurried pace, giving Mabel time to study him. Tall and lean, with broad shoulders beneath a dust-covered duster coat, he sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle. His dark hat was pulled low, shadowing his face. But as he drew nearer, she could make out a strong jawline darkened with several days' worth of stubble. Mabel stepped out onto the porch, squinting against the morning sun. Timothy hovered in the doorway behind her, tension evident in his stance. The stranger pulled his horse to a stop a respectful distance from the house and removed his hat, revealing thick waves of sandy brown hair and the most startling blue eyes Mabel had ever seen. Eyes that seemed to take in everything about her in one sweeping glance. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep and graveled, like he didn't use it often. "Name's Lucas Blackwood. I'm looking for work, if you're hiring." Mabel straightened her spine, trying to appear more imposing than her 5'4" frame allowed. "What kind of work are you looking for, Mr. Blackwood?" A slight smile curved his lips. "Any kind that needs doing, Mississippi." "Thornton. Mabel Thornton. This is my brother, Timothy." She gestured behind her. "And this is Thornton Ranch." Lucas Blackwood nodded respectfully toward Timothy. "Good to meet you both." "We're not hiring," Timothy said quickly. At the same moment, Mabel said, "We might have some work." The cowboy's eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent, looking between the siblings. Mabel gave Timothy a pointed look. They had discussed just yesterday how they needed help with the spring calving and mending fences damaged by winter storms. They couldn't afford to turn away capable hands, especially with rumors of rustlers growing. "Can you handle cattle, Mr. Blackwood?" Mabel asked. "Been working cattle since I was tall enough to reach a stirrup, Miss Thornton." "Where were you last employed?" "Circle M Ranch over in Wyoming Territory." Owner's son took over after the old man passed. Wanted to bring in his own men. Lucas shifted in his saddle. "I can provide a reference if needed." Mabel considered him. There was something in his direct gaze that spoke of honesty, but she'd learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. Still, they desperately needed the help. "We can offer room and board plus $15 a month," she said. "Trial basis for now." Timothy made a small noise of protest behind her, but Mabel ignored him. Lucas nodded. "That's fair. When would you like me to start?" "You can put your horse in the corral for now. After you've settled, Timothy can show you what needs doing today." Mabel gestured toward the barn. "There's a small room off the tack room where our last hand stayed. It's yours if you want it." "Much obliged, Miss Thornton." Lucas replaced his hat and tipped it slightly. "I appreciate the opportunity." As he rode toward the barn, Timothy stepped up beside Mabel. "Are you crazy?" he hissed. "We don't know anything about him. We know he needs work, and we need help," Mabel replied calmly. "We'll keep an eye on him. If he causes any trouble, we'll send him on his way." Timothy shook his head. Pa would have never hired a drifter without references. Pa isn't here, Mabel said softly, and we're barely keeping up with the work as it is. The truth of her words hung heavy between them. Since their parents' deaths, they'd struggled to maintain the ranch. Neighboring ranchers had offered to buy them out some kindly, others with thinly veiled threats about a woman's inability to run a cattle operation. Mabel had rebuffed them all, determined to preserve her father's legacy. Fine, Timothy conceded. But I'm keeping the rifle loaded. Mabel watched as Lucas led his horse into the corral, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely at ease with animals. There was something about him that intrigued her, a quietness that seemed at odds with his commanding presence. She'd had little time for social niceties or courting rituals in recent years. The nearest town, Willow Creek, was a half-day's ride away, and her infrequent visits were strictly for supplies and business. The few young men who had shown interest were quickly discouraged by her independent nature or intimidated by the responsibilities she carried. At 22, Mabel had resigned herself to spinsterhood, focusing instead on teaching Timothy the ranching business so he could someday take over. Romance was a luxury she couldn't afford, and while other young women her age were married with children, Mabel had never even been kissed. It was a fact that occasionally stung in the quiet moments before sleep, but she'd pushed such girlish desires aside for more practical concerns. As she watched Lucas unsaddle his horse with practiced efficiency, she caught herself admiring the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt. Embarrassed by her own thoughts, she turned abruptly and went back to her laundry, determined to maintain a strictly professional relationship with their new hand. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Spring calving was in full swing, requiring round-the-clock attention. Lucas proved himself invaluable, working tirelessly alongside Timothy, teaching the boy techniques for handling difficult births and tracking strays. Mabel found herself impressed by his knowledge and work ethic. One evening, as Mabel prepared supper, she watched through the window as Lucas patiently demonstrated to Timothy how to properly throw a lasso. The boy had struggled with the technique for years, but under Lucas's calm instruction, he was finally getting the hang of it. Timothy's face lit up with a grin when he successfully caught a post, and Lucas clapped him on the shoulder with genuine pride. It was the first time Mabel had seen her brother truly smile in months. The realization brought a lump to her throat. "Supper's ready," she called from the doorway, and the two males ambled toward the house, Timothy animatedly describing his progress. "Lucas says I'm a natural," Timothy boasted as he washed his hands in the basin by the door. "Is that so?" Mabel raised an eyebrow at Lucas, who shrugged modestly. "The boy's got talent," he said simply. "Just needed a little guidance." At the table, Mabel noticed how Lucas waited for her to be seated before taking his own chair, a small courtesy her father had always observed, but one that had been absent from their table since his passing. These little glimpses of the man beneath the cowboy exterior intrigued her more each day. "Mr. Blackwood, may I ask where you learned your ranching skills?" Mabel passed him a plate of biscuits. "You seem quite knowledgeable." Lucas took a biscuit, his fingers briefly brushing hers, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "My father ran a small spread in Texas. I grew up learning the trade from him." "And yet you're writing from Wyoming?" Mabel couldn't help her curiosity. A shadow passed over Lucas's face. "Life takes unexpected turns, Miss Thornton. After my father died, the ranch went to my older brother. We disagreed on how things should be run. I've been working other men's land ever since." There was more to the story. Mabel could sense it in the careful way he chose his words, but she didn't press. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred to keep private. "Well, we're fortunate you happened by our ranch," she said instead. Lucas looked up from his plate, meeting her eyes directly. "I consider myself the fortunate one, Miss Thornton." Something in his steady gaze made Mabel's cheeks warm, and she quickly turned her attention back to her food. Across the table, Timothy glanced between them with narrowed eyes. As the days stretched into weeks, Lucas became an indispensable part of their operation. Fences were mended, cattle were tended, and for the first time in years, Mabel felt the crushing weight of responsibility lighten somewhat. She even found occasional moments to herself, time to read or work on the quilt she'd started before her mother's death. Spring rains came, turning the landscape a vibrant green. One particularly beautiful afternoon, Mabel decided to take lunch to the men who were working in the north pasture. She packed bread, cheese, and slices of ham, along with a jug of cool water from the well. As she approached on horseback, she saw Lucas working alone, driving posts for a new section of fence. His shirt was off, draped over a nearby bush, his tan skin gleaming with sweat in the midday sun. Mabel pulled her horse to a stop, suddenly flustered by the sight of his bare torso, the muscles of his back and shoulders flexing with each swing of the mallet. She considered turning back, but he'd already spotted her. He set down his tool and reached for his shirt, pulling it on but leaving it unbuttoned as he walked toward her. "Miss Thornton," he greeted her, squinting up with those piercing blue eyes. "Everything all right?" Mabel swallowed hard, trying not to stare at the exposed strip of chest where his shirt hung open. "Yes, fine. I brought lunch." She held up the basket awkwardly. "Where's Timothy?" "Sent him to check on a heifer that looked close to calving," Lucas explained, reaching up to help her down from her horse. His hands were strong and warm on her waist, and for a brief, dizzying moment, they stood close enough that she could smell the clean sweat and leather scent of him. Mabel stepped back quickly, busying herself with untying the basket from her saddle. "Well, he's missing lunch then." Lucas smiled, and Mabel noticed how it transformed his usually serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "More for us, I suppose." They settled in the shade of a large cottonwood tree, spreading the simple meal between them. Lucas buttoned his shirt, much to Mabel's relief and strange disappointment. "I want to thank you," she said after they'd eaten in companionable silence for a while. "The ranch hasn't run this smoothly in years." Lucas took a drink of water before answering. "It's a good piece of land. Your father chose well." "Yes, he did." Mabel gazed out over the rolling pasture, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "Sometimes I worry I'm not doing it justice." "From what I've seen, you're doing just fine," Lucas said, his voice gentle. "Better than most men would in your position." Mabel looked at him in surprise. "Most men don't think a woman has any business running a ranch." "Most men are fools, then," Lucas replied simply. A smile tugged at Mabel's lips. "That's not a popular opinion in these parts." "Never much cared for popular opinions." Lucas leaned back against the tree trunk. "My mother ran our ranch for 3 years when my father was away fighting in the war. Did a better job than he did, though he'd never admit it." "She sounds remarkable." "She was." A fond smile softened his features. "Taught me that capability has nothing to do with whether you wear trousers or skirts." They fell into conversation easily after that, talking about ranching techniques, childhood memories, and books they'd read. Mabel was surprised to learn that Lucas had a love of poetry, particularly Walt Whitman, whose collection, Leaves of Grass, he carried in his saddlebag. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married," he explained when Mabel expressed surprise. "She made sure all her children appreciated literature, even if we were destined to be ranchers." The afternoon slipped away, and Mabel realized with a start that they'd been talking for over 2 hours. "Oh, I should get back to the house. There's bread to bake, and I've kept you from your work," Lucas finished, standing and offering his hand to help her up. "Forgive me." Mabel took his hand, feeling a now familiar flutter in her stomach at his touch. "There's nothing to forgive. I've enjoyed our conversation." As they packed up the remains of lunch, their hands brushed several times, each touch sending sparks along Mabel's skin. When Lucas helped her mount her horse, his hands lingering slightly longer than necessary on her waist, she found herself wishing irrationally that he would pull her back down into his arms instead. "Thank you for lunch, Miss Thornton," he said, looking up at her with those eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade of competence and independence. "Mabel," she said impulsively. "You should call me Mabel. After all, you've been with us for nearly a month now." A slow smile spread across his face. "Thank you, Mabel. I'd be honored if you'd call me Lucas in return." "Lucas," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue and finding she liked the sound of it. With a nod and what she hoped was a casual smile, she turned her horse toward home, feeling his eyes on her back as she rode away. That night, as Mabel lay in bed, she found herself replaying their conversation, analyzing every word and gesture. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to think of a man as anything other than a potential business partner or threat that she hardly recognized the feelings stirring within her. Attraction. That's what this was. Simple, physical attraction to a handsome man who had been kind to her. Nothing to lose sleep over. But sleep proved elusive anyway. Her mind filled with images of Lucas's smile, the way the sunlight had played across his features, how his voice had softened when he spoke of his mother. Eventually, she drifted off, only to dream of blue eyes asking questions she wasn't sure how to answer. The following weeks brought increasing warmth as summer approached. The calving season wound down, and the ranch settled into a more predictable rhythm. Lucas proved himself adept at every task, from breaking horses to repairing equipment. Timothy, initially suspicious, had grown to admire the older man, following him around like a shadow whenever possible. One evening, as Mabel needed dough for the next day's bread, Lucas and Timothy returned from town with supplies and mail. Timothy burst through the door, waving a poster excitedly. "There's going to be a town social next Saturday," he announced. "With music and dancing and everything." Mabel wiped flour from her hands. "Is that so?" "Yes, and Lucas says we should go," Timothy continued, shooting a glance at the cowboy who was bringing in sacks of flour and sugar. "Did he now?" Mabel raised an eyebrow at Lucas, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I merely suggested it might be nice for you both to have some entertainment," Lucas clarified. "You've been working hard." Timothy nodded enthusiastically. "We haven't been to town for anything but supplies in ages. And Mrs. Henderson at the general store asked about you specifically, Mabel." Mabel hesitated. Social gatherings had seemed frivolous after their parents' deaths, and she'd avoided them, focusing instead on the ranch. But Timothy's eager expression tugged at her heart. He was still young, deserving of some joy and normal experiences despite their circumstances. "I suppose we could go for a little while," she conceded. Timothy whooped with delight. "Can Lucas come too?" Both Mabel and Lucas looked startled by the question. Their eyes met across the room, and Mabel felt a now familiar warmth spread through her chest. "If Mr. Blackwood wishes to attend, he's welcome to join us," she said carefully. Lucas set down the supplies he was carrying. "I'd be honored to accompany you both," he said, his eyes never leaving Mabel's face. "If you're sure I wouldn't be intruding on family time." "Don't be ridiculous," Mabel said, turning back to her bread dough to hide the color rising in her cheeks. "You've earned a night of entertainment as much as we have." The days leading up to the social were filled with an anticipation Mabel hadn't felt in years. She found herself rummaging through her mother's old trunk, pulling out a dress she hadn't worn since before her parents' deaths, a simple but pretty blue cotton with white lace trim at the collar and cuffs. She washed and pressed it carefully, then spent an embarrassing amount of time practicing different ways to arrange her hair before settling on a simple style with a few loose curls framing her face. When Saturday arrived, Mabel found herself uncharacteristically nervous as she prepared for the social. She'd spent so long being the responsible ranch owner that the idea of attending a social event as simply a young woman felt foreign. Timothy was already waiting by the wagon when Mabel emerged from the house, and his eyes widened at the sight of her. "You look like Ma," he said softly, and Mabel's heart constricted at the mixture of surprise and sadness in his voice. "Is that a good thing?" she asked, smoothing her skirt self-consciously. Timothy nodded. "You look pretty is all." Before Mabel could respond, Lucas rounded the corner of the barn, leading his saddled horse. He stopped short when he saw her, his expression shifting from casual to something more intense that made Mabel's pulse quicken. "Miss Thornton," he said, then caught himself. "Mabel, you look lovely." The simple compliment, delivered in his deep, sincere voice, brought heat to Mabel's cheeks. "Thank you, Lucas." He had cleaned up as well, she noticed. His usual work clothes had been replaced by a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and clean trousers. His hair, usually hidden beneath his hat, was neatly combed, the sandy brown waves tamed somewhat, but still falling attractively across his forehead. "Will you be riding alongside the wagon?" Mabel asked, trying to maintain her composure. Lucas nodded. "Thought it best. The wagon seats look a mite cramped for three." In truth, they could have managed, but Mabel was grateful for the breathing room. Just standing near him in this state of heightened awareness was making her heart beat erratically. The journey to town passed pleasantly, with Timothy chattering excitedly about the social and what friends he hoped to see there. Lucas rode alongside, occasionally joining the conversation but mostly watching the road ahead with alert eyes. Willow Creek was bustling with activity when they arrived. Lanterns hung from every available post, casting a warm glow over the main street. The schoolhouse, which served as the town hall for events, was already filled with music and laughter. Lucas helped Mabel down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. He held her just a moment longer than necessary, and when she looked up to thank him, the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. "Shall we?" he asked softly, offering his arm. Mabel placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, acutely aware of the firm muscle beneath his sleeve. Timothy had already scampered ahead to join a group of boys his age, leaving Mabel and Lucas to enter the social together. The schoolhouse had been transformed. Desks were pushed against the walls to create a dance floor, and wildflowers adorned every surface. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, while tables of food and punch lined another wall. "Mabel Thornton, as I live and breathe." Mabel turned to see Mrs. Henderson, the plump, friendly owner of the general store, bustling toward them. The older woman enveloped Mabel in a warm hug before pulling back to examine her. "Let me look at you, child. It's been months since you've come to town for anything but flour and nails." Mrs. Henderson's gaze shifted to Lucas, her eyes twinkling with interest. "And who might this handsome gentleman be?" "Mrs. Henderson, this is Lucas Blackwood," Mabel introduced. "He's been working at the ranch since spring." "Lucas, Mrs. Henderson owns the general store and knows everything about everyone in Willow Creek." "A pleasure, madam," Lucas said, tipping his hat respectfully. Mrs. Henderson beamed. "Likewise, Mr. Blackwood. I'm delighted to see Mabel with an escort tonight. The poor girl works too hard and never has any fun." "Mrs. Henderson," Mabel protested, mortified. The older woman patted her arm. Now you know it's true. You've been shouldering the weight of that ranch all alone since your dear parents passed. It's high time you enjoyed yourself a little." She winked at Lucas. "Make sure she dances tonight, young man." As Mrs. Henderson moved away to greet other arrivals, Mabel covered her face with one hand. "I apologize for that. Mrs. Henderson has appointed herself my unofficial guardian since my mother died." Lucas smiled. "No need to apologize. She clearly cares about you." He paused, looking toward the dance floor where couples were already twirling to a lively reel. "She did make a good suggestion, though." Mabel looked up at him questioningly. "About dancing," he clarified, extending his hand. "Would you do me the honor, Mabel?" Her heart skipped. It's been years since I've danced. I'm terribly out of practice. Fortunately, I'm an excellent leader," Lucas replied with a confidence that made her smile. "And I promise not to hold it against you if you step on my toes." Before she could overthink it, Mabel placed her hand in his. "Very well, Mr. Blackwood. Let's see if you dance as well as you mend fences." Lucas led her to the dance floor just as the musicians struck up a waltz. He placed one hand at her waist, the other holding hers aloft, and began to guide her through the steps. True to his word, he was an excellent dancer, leading with such confidence that Mabel found herself following effortlessly despite her years of absence from such activities. "Where did a cowboy learn to waltz so well?" she asked as they moved smoothly among the other couples. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "My mother again. She insisted all her sons learn to dance properly. Said a man who could dance well would never want for female company." "Wise woman," Mabel replied, surprising herself with the flirtatious tone. "She was," Lucas agreed, his eyes never leaving Mabel's face. "Though I never fully appreciated her lessons until this moment." The simple compliment warmed Mabel from within. As they continued to dance, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. There was only Lucas, his steady hand at her waist, his eyes holding hers, the faint scent of soap and leather that was uniquely his. When the music ended, he didn't immediately release her, and Mabel found she didn't want him to. They stood for a moment, still in the dance position, until the musicians began tuning up for the next song. "Punch," Lucas suggested, reluctantly dropping his hands. "Yes, please," Mabel replied, suddenly aware of how dry her throat had become. They made their way to the refreshment table, where Lucas procured 2 cups of punch. As they sipped their drinks, Mabel became aware of curious glances from the townspeople. It had been so long since she'd attended a social event, and longer still since she'd been seen in the company of a man who wasn't a business associate. "People are staring," she murmured to Lucas. He glanced around casually. They're admiring how beautiful you look tonight. Mabel shook her head, but couldn't help smiling at his gallantry. They're wondering who you are and what you're doing with the spinster rancher. Lucas frowned. Is that how you see yourself? A spinster? The directness of his question caught her off guard. It's just a fact. I'm 22, unmarried, with little prospect of changing that while running a ranch and raising my brother. 22 is hardly an old maid, Lucas countered. And any man worth his salt would see your dedication to your family's legacy as an admirable quality, not an impediment. Before Mabel could respond to this unexpected defense, Timothy appeared at her elbow, breathless with excitement. Mabel, they're going to do a square dance next. You have to join in. He turned to Lucas. You too. The next hour passed in a whirl of music and laughter as they participated in the lively square dance, followed by more waltzes and reels. Mabel found herself genuinely enjoying the evening, especially when dancing with Lucas, who seemed equally at ease with the energetic group dances and the more intimate waltzes. During a break in the dancing, while Lucas went to fetch more punch, Mabel was cornered by several of the town's matrons, led by Mrs. Henderson. That Mr. Blackwood seems quite taken with you, dear, Mrs. Henderson said with a meaningful smile. He works for me, Mabel replied, trying to sound matter of fact. He's an excellent ranch hand. Mrs. Stevenson, the banker's wife, raised a skeptical eyebrow. A ranch hand doesn't look at his employer the way that man looks at you, Mabel Thornton. Heat crept up Mabel's neck. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do, Mrs. Henderson said kindly. And it's about time. You've been hiding away on that ranch for too long, child. I haven't been hiding, Mabel protested. I've been working. All work and no courtship makes for a lonely life, Mrs. Stevenson declared. My Henry says you're foreman. He's not my foreman, Mabel corrected. Has been asking intelligent questions about cattle prices and land management. Mrs. Stevenson continued as if Mabel hadn't spoken. Not the usual concerns of a drifting ranch hand. Mabel didn't know how to respond to this. It was true that Lucas had shown an unusual interest in the business side of ranching, often discussing with her the accounts and future planning for the herd. But she'd attributed this to his general thoroughness and dedication. Before she could formulate a response, Lucas returned with their punch. The ladies exchanged knowing glances before dispersing, leaving Mabel flustered and confused. Everything all right? Lucas asked, handing her a cup. Yes, Mabel said quickly. Just town gossip. Lucas studied her face, but didn't press the issue. Instead, he gestured toward the open doors, where several couples had stepped outside to enjoy the cool evening air. Would you like to get some fresh air? Mabel nodded gratefully, and they made their way outside. The night was clear, stars twinkling brilliantly above them. They found a quiet spot at the edge of the schoolyard, away from the other couples, but still within sight of the doors. Are you enjoying yourself? Lucas asked as they stood side by side, looking up at the night sky. More than I expected to, Mabel admitted. I'd forgotten how nice it could be to simply be young, I suppose. Lucas turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful in the dim light spilling from the schoolhouse windows. You've taken on responsibilities that would crush most men twice your age, Mabel. No one would blame you for wanting a night to just be a young woman at a dance. Sometimes I wonder if I've forgotten how, she confessed, surprising herself with her candor. To be just a woman, I mean, not a rancher or a surrogate parent or a business owner. From where I'm standing, Lucas said softly, you're doing a fine job of it tonight. Their eyes met, and Mabel felt that now familiar flutter in her chest intensify. Lucas took a step closer, and for a wild moment, she thought he might kiss her. Her heart raced at the possibility, equal parts terrified and hopeful. Instead, he gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. You are remarkable, Mabel Thornton, he murmured. The tenderness in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. No one had spoken to her like this, looked at her like this since before her parents died. She'd forgotten how it felt to be seen as something other than a responsibility bearer. Lucas, there you are. Timothy's voice cut through the moment as he bounded toward them. They're about to serve the supper, and Mrs. Henderson saved us seats at her table. The spell broken, Mabel stepped back, both relieved and disappointed by the interruption. We should go in then, she said, her voice not entirely steady. Lucas offered his arm once more, and as they followed Timothy back inside, he leaned close to her ear. "We'll continue our conversation another time," he promised, his breath warm against her skin. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, with good food and conversation at Mrs. Henderson's table. Throughout the meal, Mabel was acutely aware of Lucas beside her, their arms occasionally brushing, his deep laugh reverberating through her when someone told an amusing story. By the time they prepared to leave, Mabel felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them. The professional boundary of employer and employee had blurred, revealing something more complex and thrilling beneath. The night air had grown colder during their time inside, and Lucas insisted Mabel wear his coat for the journey home. It engulfed her smaller frame, but carried his scent, a comforting mixture of leather, pine, and something uniquely him that made her feel oddly safe. Timothy, exhausted from dancing and excitement, fell asleep almost immediately as they started home, slumping against Mabel's shoulder. Lucas rode alongside the wagon, occasionally commenting on the beauty of the night or pointing out constellations overhead. When they reached the ranch, Lucas lifted the sleeping Timothy from the wagon and carried him inside, placing him gently on his bed before returning outside where Mabel waited. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," she said, removing his coat and handing it back to him. "I enjoyed myself more than I have in years." Lucas took the coat, his fingers brushing hers in the process. "The pleasure was mine, Mabel." They stood in the yard, the house dark and quiet behind them, stars shining brilliantly overhead. Neither seemed willing to end the evening just yet. "Would you like to sit for a while?" Mabel found herself asking, gesturing toward the porch. "It's such a beautiful night." Lucas smiled. "I'd like that very much." They settled on the porch steps, closer than propriety might dictate, but not so close as to be scandalous. For a while, they simply sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. "Can I ask you something personal?" Lucas finally said, his voice low and thoughtful. "You can ask," Mabel replied. "I reserve the right not to answer." He chuckled at that. "Fair enough." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Earlier tonight, you called yourself a spinster. Is that truly how you see your future? Running this ranch alone?" The question touched on thoughts Mabel usually kept carefully buried. "I don't know that I have much choice," she said honestly. "The ranch needs someone to run it until Timothy is old enough to take over. And most men, well, they want a wife who will focus on hearth and home, not cattle and crops." "Some men might appreciate a woman who can do both," Lucas suggested quietly. Mabel turned to look at him, finding his gaze already on her, intent and warm in the moonlight. "Are there such men, Lucas?" "In my experience, they want to take over, to change things to suit themselves." "Not all men," he said. "Some might see the value in what you've built here, in who you are." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken meaning. Mabel's heart began to race as Lucas shifted slightly closer. "Mabel," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "may I kiss you?" The question, so direct and yet so gentle, stunned her. In all her imaginings of her first kiss, and yes, there had been imaginings, though she'd never admit it, she had always feared it would be stolen, taken without her consent by some overeager suitor or, worse, one of the unsavory men who occasionally passed through town. But Lucas was asking, and more than that, he was waiting, his eyes holding hers, patient and questioning. Not demanding, not assuming, simply asking. "I've never been kissed before," she confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something that looked remarkably like tenderness. "I'm honored by your honesty," he said softly, "and even more honored that you might consider me worthy of being your first." Mabel swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "Yes," she whispered. "You may kiss me, Lucas." He moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. One hand came up to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly across her skin. Mabel's eyes fluttered closed as he leaned in, and then his lips were on hers, warm, gentle, and impossibly sweet. The kiss was brief, a whisper of contact that nonetheless sent sparks racing through Mabel's entire body. When Lucas pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers, she felt bereft at the loss of connection. All right, he murmured, his breath warm against her lips. In answer, Mabel leaned forward and kissed him again, emboldened by the rush of new sensations. This time, Lucas's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. Mabel's hands found their way to his shoulders, steadying herself against the dizzying feelings washing over her. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you hanging laundry in the morning sun," he admitted. Mabel laughed softly, surprised by his confession. "Even with my hair a mess and flour on my apron?" "Especially then," he said, pressing another quick kiss to her lips. "You looked so capable and beautiful, like a force of nature." They sat together for a long while after that, talking softly, exchanging occasional kisses, and watching the stars will overhead. It was well past midnight when Mabel reluctantly suggested they should get some rest. Lucas walked her to the door, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture that seemed both old-fashioned and thrillingly intimate. "Good night, Mabel Thornton," he said, his voice low and warm. "Sleep well." "Good night, Lucas," she replied, her voice not entirely steady. As she prepared for bed that night, Mabel's mind whirled with new emotions and possibilities. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than just duty and responsibility, a future that might include love as well. The next morning, Mabel woke early as usual, but with a lightness in her heart that had been absent for years. As she moved through her morning routine, stoking the fire, preparing breakfast, fetching water from the well, she found herself humming softly. When Lucas appeared at the kitchen door, their eyes met, and a moment of shared understanding passed between them. Nothing had been said about what happened between them becoming public knowledge, but there was a new warmth in Lucas's smile as he greeted her. "Morning," he said simply, but the way his eyes lingered on her face spoke volumes. "Good morning," Mabel replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Coffee's hot." Timothy stumbled into the kitchen moments later, still half asleep and oblivious to the charged atmosphere between the adults. As they sat down to breakfast, Mabel wondered how to navigate this new territory, being both employer and whatever she was now becoming to Lucas. The day passed in a blur of normal activities, yet everything felt different. When their hands accidentally touched as they passed tools in the barn, the contact lingered. Their eyes sought each other across the yard. Simple conversations seemed layered with deeper meaning. By evening, Mabel was both exhilarated and exhausted by the constant awareness of Lucas's presence. After supper, when Timothy had gone to his room to read, Lucas suggested they take a walk to check on a new calf born the day before. The excuse was transparent, but Mabel grabbed her shawl and followed him out into the twilight without hesitation. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the barn, where Lucas gently took her hand, leading her not to the stall where the new mother and calf rested, but to a quiet corner where bales of hay were stacked. "I've been wanting to get you alone all day," he admitted, pulling her close. "Is that terribly inappropriate of me?" Mabel smiled up at him, her hands resting on his chest. "Probably, but I've been thinking the same thing." Lucas's answering smile was brilliant in the dim light of the barn. He leaned down to kiss her, and Mabel met him halfway, all the longing of the day pouring into their embrace. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her slightly off her feet as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Lucas didn't release her completely, keeping her close within the circle of his arms. "Mabel," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I need to tell you something." A flicker of apprehension curled through her. In her limited experience, such statements rarely preceded good news. "What is it?" Lucas took a deep breath. "I haven't been entirely forthcoming about my past." Mabel stiffened slightly, but didn't pull away. "Go on. Everything I told you was true," he hastened to assure her. "About my father's ranch in Texas, working in Wyoming. But there's more to the story." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The disagreement with my brother wasn't just about how to run the ranch. He got involved with some men who wanted to use our land for illegal activities. When I confronted him, things got ugly." "How ugly?" Mabel asked quietly. "There was a fight. One of his associates pulled a gun." Lucas's voice grew tight. "I defended myself. The man died." Mabel gasped softly. "Lucas, It was ruled self-defense, he continued quickly. But my brother swore revenge. He has connections. I left Texas to protect my mother and sisters. Been moving ever since, never staying too long in one place. He released her then, stepping back slightly, as if expecting her to flee. I understand if this changes things between us. I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid of losing what we were building. Mabel studied his face in the dim light, seeing the vulnerability and regret written there. Part of her wanted to be angry that he'd kept this from her, but she understood the burden of a difficult past, the fear of judgment. Does anyone know you're here? She asked practically. Lucas shook his head. I've been careful, changed my route several times, never sent letters. As far as I know, no one has followed me. And your mother and sisters? Are they safe? Yes. My mother moved them to my uncle's farm in Louisiana. My brother doesn't know where. A pained expression crossed his face. I haven't seen them in over 2 years. Mabel considered this new information carefully. Thank you for telling me the truth, Lucas. I appreciate your honesty, even if it's belated. I understand if you want me to leave, he said quietly. Is that what you want? She countered. To leave. His eyes met hers, intense and sincere. No. For the first time in years, I've found somewhere I want to stay. Someone I want to stay with. The simple declaration made Mabel's heart race. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them once more. Then stay, she said softly. We'll face whatever comes together. Relief flooded Lucas's features as he pulled her back into his arms. You are the most remarkable woman I've ever known, Mabel Thornton. Their kiss this time was deeper, filled with newfound trust and the promise of a shared future. Mabel felt herself melting into him, all the barriers she'd built around her heart crumbling in the face of this unexpected love. A sudden noise at the barn door startled them apart. Timothy stood there, lantern in hand, his expression a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. I was looking for you both, he stammered. Mrs. Henderson just rode up. Says there's trouble in town. Mabel straightened her skirts, fighting a blush. What kind of trouble? Dunno. She asked to speak with you right away. Lucas and Mabel exchanged concerned glances before hurrying toward the house, where Mrs. Henderson's buggy was indeed waiting. The older woman looked uncharacteristically grave as she climbed down to meet them. Mabel, dear, I'm sorry to bring this news, she said without preamble. There were some men in the saloon asking questions about the ranch and about you specifically. Mabel frowned. What kind of questions? If you'd hired any new hands recently. Described a man matching Mr. Blackwood here. Mrs. Henderson glanced at Lucas, whose face had gone hard. They didn't seem like cattle buyers or legitimate businessmen, if you take my meaning. Lucas stepped forward. How many men? 3 that I saw? Rough-looking sorts. Mrs. Henderson shuddered slightly. My Henry overheard them talking about settling a score. He sent me straight out here to warn you. Mabel felt a chill run through her. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. We appreciate the warning. You should come stay in town tonight, the older woman urged. All of you. Lucas shook his head. That would just put others in danger. Better to face this here, on our own terms. Mrs. Henderson looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Lucas's expression stopped her. At least let me take the boy back with me, she suggested, nodding toward Timothy. No, Timothy said firmly, surprising them all. This is my home too. I'm staying. Mabel wanted to insist he go with Mrs. Henderson, but the determined set of his jaw, so like their fathers, told her it would be a losing battle. Very well, she conceded. But you'll do exactly as Lucas and I tell you, understood? Timothy nodded solemnly. After Mrs. Henderson reluctantly departed with promises to send help if they didn't appear in town by noon the next day, Lucas quickly took charge of securing the ranch. He checked and loaded all available firearms, positioned lanterns strategically around the yard to eliminate shadowy hiding places, and moved the horses from the corral to the barn for safety. We should take shifts watching, he told Mabel as they stood in the kitchen, speaking in low voices while Timothy prepared ammunition at the table. If they come tonight, it will likely be before dawn. Mabel nodded, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. I'm a fair shot, she said. Father made sure of that. Lucas gave her a tight smile. I don't doubt it. He hesitated, then added softly. Mabel, if anything happens to me, don't. She interrupted, placing her fingers against his lips. We'll get through this together. His eyes softened as he took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. Together, he agreed. They arranged the watch schedule. Lucas would take the first shift until midnight, then Mabel until 3, with Timothy finishing until dawn. Though Mabel doubted she could sleep with danger approaching, Lucas insisted she rest while she could. "I'll wake you at the slightest sign of trouble," he promised. Reluctantly, Mabel retreated to her bedroom, though she didn't undress, merely lying atop the covers with her father's shotgun beside her. Despite her certainty that sleep would elude her, exhaustion eventually pulled her under. She woke with a start to Lucas's hand on her shoulder, his finger pressed to his lips in a gesture for silence. The room was dark, lit only by the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. "They're here," he whispered. 3 riders, approaching from the east. Timothy's watching from the back. Mabel rose immediately, grabbing the shotgun. "What's the plan?" "We have the advantage of knowing the property," Lucas said, checking his revolver. "I want you to stay inside, cover the front windows. I'll take position by the barn. And Timothy, already in the root cellar with a rifle. There's only one way in, and he has a clear shot if anyone tries to enter." Lucas's face was grim in the dim light. "I don't want to kill anyone if it can be avoided, but these men won't hesitate to hurt you or Timothy to get to me." Mabel nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Be careful," she whispered. Lucas touched her cheek gently. "Always." He started to turn away, then paused, pulling her into a fierce kiss. "For luck," he murmured against her lips. Then he was gone, slipping out the back door into the darkness. Mabel took her position by the front window, shotgun ready, heart pounding in her chest. Minutes stretched like hours as she strained to see movement in the yard. The moon had gone behind clouds, casting the ranch in deep shadow. She could make out the shape of the barn, the corral fence, but little else. A soft whistle, 3 notes that mimicked a night bird but were too regular to be natural, alerted her that Timothy had spotted something from his position. Mabel tensed, finger hovering near the trigger of her shotgun. Suddenly, a flare of light erupted near the barn, a lantern being uncovered. In its glow, Mabel could see Lucas standing in the open, his stance casual, but his right hand hovering near his holstered gun. "I know you're out there," his voice carried clearly across the yard. "Show yourselves. This doesn't need to involve innocent people." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, 3 figures emerged from the shadows near the corral. Even from a distance, Mabel could see they were rough-looking men, trail-worn and hard-faced. The leader, a tall man with a distinctive red bandana, stepped forward. "Lucas Blackwood," he called. "Your brother sends his regards." "I'm sure he does," Lucas replied evenly. "What does he want?" "Justice," the man said. "You killed his friend and partner." "His partner pulled a gun on me," Lucas countered. "It was self-defense, and the law agreed." The man spat on the ground. "The law? Your brother has his own ideas about justice. Then he should come himself, not send hired guns." The 3 men spread out slightly, a tactical move that made Mabel's blood run cold. They were positioning themselves for a fight. "He'll see you soon enough," the leader promised. "After we bring you back. Dead or alive, he wasn't particular." Mabel saw Lucas's shoulders tense, though his voice remained calm. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now." The leader laughed, an ugly sound in the night. "Home? Playing rancher with a woman and a boy? Your brother told us all about your weakness for strays." Lucas's voice hardened. "Leave them out of this. Your quarrel is with me." "Maybe," the man conceded. "But taking something you care about might make you more cooperative." At this threat, Mabel had heard enough. Before she could reconsider, she pushed open the front door, stepping onto the porch with her shotgun leveled. "You're trespassing on Thornton property," she called, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. "I suggest you leave while you still can." The men's heads whipped toward her, momentarily distracted. Lucas used the opportunity to draw his revolver, aiming squarely at the leader. "The lady has given you fair warning," he said coldly. "I suggest you heed it." The leader's face twisted with anger. "You think you can take all 3 of us, Blackwood?" "He's not alone," came Timothy's voice as he emerged from his hiding place, rifle raised. The boy had positioned himself behind the intruders, effectively surrounding them. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the leader made a fatal miscalculation. His hand twitched toward his holster, And in the split second that followed, several things happened at once. Lucas fired, his shot striking the leader's shoulder. The man's own shot went wild as he stumbled backward. The second intruder drew and aimed at Lucas, but Mabel's shotgun blast knocked him off his feet before he could fire. The third man raised his hands in surrender, apparently deciding the odds had turned against him. "Drop your weapons," Mabel commanded, advancing down the porch steps, shotgun still trained on the remaining threat. The wounded leader clutched his bleeding shoulder, hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over, Blackwood," he snarled. "Yes, it is," Lucas replied firmly, kicking the man's fallen revolver away. "You'll be facing charges for trespassing and attempted murder. I doubt my brother will waste more men trying to free you from prison." Timothy had approached cautiously, his rifle never wavering from the third man, who had wisely remained still with his hands raised. "Mabel," Lucas called, "there's rope in the barn. We need to secure them until we can get the sheriff out here." The aftermath was a blur of activity. They bound the intruders, tended to the wounded men's injuries, and sent Timothy to town at first light to fetch the sheriff. By mid-morning, the three would-be assassins were in custody, the leader facing the most serious charges due to his explicit threats. Sheriff Davis, a gruff but fair man who had known Mabel's father, took detailed statements from everyone. When Lucas explained the full situation, including his history in Texas, the sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "I'll wire the authorities in Texas, confirm your story about the self-defense ruling," he said. "But from what I've seen here, you were clearly defending this family from harm." He glanced at Mabel. "These men will face justice here first, before any consideration of extradition." As the sheriff's wagon disappeared down the road with the prisoners, an exhausted silence fell over the ranch. The danger had passed, but the events of the night had left their mark. Mabel found Lucas in the barn, methodically brushing down his horse, a task that seemed to soothe him. She approached quietly, not wanting to startle him. "Timothy's resting," she said softly. "Sheriff Davis said he'll send word once the prisoners are safely in the county jail." Lucas nodded, not pausing in his rhythmic brushing. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment. "I never meant to bring danger to your door." Mabel moved closer, placing her hand over his, stilling the brush. "Look at me, Lucas." He did, his blue eyes troubled. "This is not your fault," she said firmly. "You defended yourself from a threat, just as we defended ourselves last night. But if you hadn't stayed, Timothy and I would still be struggling to run this ranch alone. If you hadn't stayed, I might never have known what it feels like to." She faltered, suddenly shy despite everything they'd been through together. Lucas set down the brush, turning to face her fully. "What does it feel like, Mabel?" he asked softly. She met his gaze directly. "To be in love," she finished simply. The words hung between them, honest and unadorned. Lucas's expression shifted from troubled to wondering, as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. "You love me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mabel nodded, her heart pounding. "I do. Despite the danger, despite your past, or perhaps because of it, because it made you who you are. I love you, Lucas Blackwood." In 2 strides, he closed the distance between them, gathering her into his arms with such tenderness it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too, Mabel Thornton," he murmured against her hair. "More than I thought possible." When he kissed her this time, it was different from their previous embraces, deeper, more certain, filled with promise rather than question. Mabel responded with equal fervor, all the fear and tension of the night transforming into a fierce joy that they had survived, that they were together. "Marry me," Lucas said when they finally broke apart, his forehead resting against hers. "Not tomorrow or next week, I know we have things to sort out first, but someday soon. Be my wife, my partner in everything." Mabel smiled up at him, her heart fuller than she'd ever imagined possible. "Yes," she answered simply. "Yes to all of it." The following weeks brought significant changes to Thornton Ranch. True to his word, Sheriff Davis contacted the authorities in Texas, confirming Lucas's account of the self-defense ruling. He also helped arrange for a telegram to be sent to Lucas's mother in Louisiana, letting her know he was safe and had found a home. The 3 intruders were tried and convicted, with the leader receiving the harshest sentence for attempted murder. During the trial, evidence emerged that Lucas's brother had indeed hired them to either kill Lucas or bring him back to Texas, information that led to an arrest warrant being issued for the brother as well. With the immediate threat neutralized, Lucas and Mabel began planning their future together. Lucas officially became foreman of the ranch, taking on more responsibility and implementing improvements he'd been considering since his arrival. Mabel, freed from some of the day-to-day management, found time to reconnect with the community in Willow Creek, no longer feeling the need to isolate herself in grief and responsibility. Timothy, perhaps most surprisingly, flourished under these new arrangements. With Lucas as a mentor, he threw himself into learning every aspect of ranching, his confidence growing daily. The sullen, wary boy who had greeted Lucas with suspicion that first day was transforming into a capable young man with dreams of his own. On a beautiful autumn afternoon, 6 months after the night of the attack, Mabel Thornton became Mabel Blackwood in a simple ceremony in the town church. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears. Timothy stood proudly as Lucas's best man, and the whole community turned out to celebrate their union. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sheriff Davis commented during the reception, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "Our Mabel, tamed by a drifting cowboy." Mabel, overhearing, laughed. "I'd hardly call it taming, Sheriff. More like a partnership of equals." Lucas smiled, his arm around his new wife's waist. "Couldn't have said it better myself." Later, as they danced together under lantern light in the town square, Lucas pulled Mabel close. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" he murmured into her ear. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "And you?" "More than I deserve," he admitted. "Sometimes I still can't believe my luck that I happened to ride by your ranch that particular morning, that you took a chance on hiring me, that you fell in love with me despite everything." Mabel smiled up at him. "Not luck, I think. Fate, perhaps. Either way," Lucas said, twirling her gently to the music, "I'm grateful for every moment, every day with you." As the music played and their friends and neighbors celebrated around them, Mabel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first morning when she'd watched a lone rider crest the hill, to her first kiss asked for with his eyes, waited for with patience, to standing beside him against danger, to today, pledging their lives to one another. She had thought her life would be defined solely by duty and responsibility, had resigned herself to a future without the kind of love she'd witnessed between her parents. Instead, she had found not just love but partnership, respect, and a future brighter than she'd dared to imagine. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, noting her thoughtful expression. Mabel smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek. "About beginnings, and how sometimes the most unexpected ones lead to the most beautiful journeys." Lucas turned his head to kiss her palm, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished between them. "Our journey is just beginning," he promised. And as they danced beneath the stars, surrounded by their community, Mabel knew with absolute certainty that he was right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, partners in all things, bound by a love that had begun with a question in his eyes and her courage to answer. 5 years later, Thornton Blackwood Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous operations in the territory. Lucas and Mabel had expanded their holdings, implemented innovative breeding programs, and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Timothy, now 21, had just returned from 2 years at an agricultural college back east, an opportunity Lucas and Mabel had insisted he take, wanting him to have choices they had never been given. He had returned full of ideas and enthusiasm, taking his place as a full partner in the family business. On a warm summer evening, Mabel sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching Lucas chase their 3-year-old daughter, Emma, around the yard. The child's delighted squeals filled the air as her father pretended he couldn't quite catch her, until finally scooping her up and spinning her around. Mabel's hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the movements of their second child, due to arrive before winter. At 31, her life bore little resemblance to what she had imagined for herself a decade earlier. Lucas deposited a giggling Emma on the porch steps, the little girl's blue eyes so like her father's, sparkling with joy. "Mama, Papa can't catch me." "I saw that." Mabel laughed, smoothing her daughter's wild brown curls. "You're getting very fast." Lucas collapsed dramatically beside his wife, pretending exhaustion. "Too fast for an old cowboy like me," he declared. Old, Mabel scoffed, reaching over to take his hand. You're in your prime, Lucas Blackwood. He grinned, bringing her hand to his lips in a gesture that still made her heart skip, even after 5 years of marriage. Flattery will get you everywhere, Mrs. Blackwood. Emma climbed into her father's lap, her small hands patting his cheeks. Story, Papa? Please. What story would you like tonight, Princess? Lucas asked, settling the child more comfortably. The kissing story, Emma declared, as she did most nights. Lucas and Mabel exchanged amused glances. Their daughter had recently become fascinated with the story of how her parents met and fell in love, particularly the part about their first kiss. Again, Lucas pretended to groan, though Mabel knew he loved telling the tale as much as Emma loved hearing it. Please, Papa. Emma's pleading expression was comically serious. Well, let's see. Lucas began, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence that entranced their daughter. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful, brave ranch owner named Mabel. Mabel listened as Lucas recounted their story, softened and simplified for a child's ears, but true in all the ways that mattered. The chance meeting, the slow building trust, the dangers faced together, and finally Emma's favorite part, the moment Lucas had asked with his eyes if he could kiss her. And did Mama say yes? Emma asked eagerly, though she knew the answer by heart. She did, Lucas confirmed, smiling at Mabel over their daughter's head. And it was the best first kiss in the history of kisses. Because you asked, Emma said solemnly, repeating the moral her father always included. And waited. That's right, Princess, Lucas agreed. Always ask, and always wait for the answer. As twilight deepened around them, and Emma began to yawn, Timothy appeared from the direction of the barn, his tall figure reminding Mabel more of their father with each passing year. Someone looks ready for bed, he observed, nodding toward his niece. Emma perked up briefly. Uncle Timmy, will you read me a book? Timothy laughed, scooping up the little girl. One book, then sleep. Deal. Deal. Emma agreed, wrapping her arms around his neck. As Timothy carried Emma inside, Lucas moved to sit beside Mabel on the porch swing, his arms sliding naturally around her shoulders. She gets more beautiful every day, he said softly, just like her mother. Mabel leaned into his embrace, savoring the quiet moment. I never imagined this life, she admitted. After my parents died, I thought my future was set just work and responsibility until Timothy was grown. Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. And now I have everything, she said simply. The ranch, family, love. More happiness than I ever thought possible. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their stand against danger, their wedding day. Any regrets? Lucas asked suddenly. About taking a chance on a drifter with a complicated past. Mabel turned to face him, seeing in his features the same handsome cowboy who had ridden up to her ranch 5 years ago, now softened by happiness and the passage of time. Not one, she said firmly. She leaned forward to kiss him, marveling that after all this time, his touch still sent the same thrill through her as it had that first night on the porch steps. When they parted, Lucas's eyes held that familiar question, the same one he'd asked silently before their first kiss. Yes, Mabel whispered, answering the unspoken question as she had so many times before. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, Mabel reflected that some questions, once answered, opened doors to possibilities beyond imagining. Her cowboy had asked with his eyes and waited for her answer, changing both their lives forever. It was, she decided, the most beautiful beginning a love story could have.